The conflict between Israel and Palestine is much more complicated and has a much more intricate history than what meets the eye. The fighting between the two people groups dates back as far as the Crusades. However, it's safe to say that the more recent conflict started when Israel was recognized as a state by the UN in 1948. Since then, tensions have grown dramatically. In learning about this conflict, it's important to understand the two sides and why they feel so passionately about what, in the eyes of others, is simply a piece of land. The most important thing to know about the Israeli people is that they are mostly Jewish. Religious beliefs are a driving force to this conflict. Jerusalem is considered the holiest city of the Jewish faith, and, furthermore, brings significant unity among the Jewish community. It has been the spiritual home of the Jewish people for approximately 3,000 years. Maintaining control of Jerusalem is essential. Palestinians, on the other hand, are mostly Muslim. They also hold the city of Jerusalem as one of the holiest cities of their faith, particularly in the Sunni Islamic faith. Jerusalem holds special significance for a number of reasons, the main one being Muhammad's trip through the city hundreds of years ago, making it Islam's first Qibla, the direction Muslims face when they pray. Access to both living in and visiting Jerusalem is an important part of the Muslim faith. In 1975, the United Nations determined that Zionism, the belief that the State of Israel is the Jewish homeland and that the Jews should not be assimilated with anyone else, is indeed racism. However, in 1991, U.S. President George Bush Sr. played a leading role in passing a UN vote that revoked this resolution, changing the UN opinion to its old, tolerant view of Zionism. Despite UN resolutions, conflict has continued, and tensions have not gone away. On November 14, 2012, Israel started an attack called Operation Pillar of Defense by assassinating Hamas military chief Ahmed Jabari. Hamas is an Islamist organization that has ruled the Gaza Strip portion of Palestine since 2007. Furthermore, due to certain military actions, Hamas is considered a terrorist group by the United States, Canada, Israel, and the European Union. Currently, Hamas holds a great deal of political power in the Arab world. Israel carried on the attack by firing more than 1,500 rockets into Gaza, killing 158 Palestinians, 102 of which were civilians, and injuring approximately 1,000 over the course of 8 days. All the while, Hamas returned fire, launching almost the same number of rockets, which resulted in 6 Israeli deaths, 4 of which were civilians, and more than 250 injuries. A ceasefire was announced on November 21st, ending the 8-day war. However, much damage had already been done. Shortly after the end of the conflict, the United Nations voted in a 138-9 decision to recognize the nation of Palestine as a state. The United States, Israel, and Canada were among the countries in opposition to Palestine's recognition. Israel protested. The very next day, they announced plans to build settlements on the West Bank. Israel received immediate rebuke, even from their dear ally, the United States. Constructing settlements in Palestinian territories would only prolong peace, not expedite it. To get closer to the story, I interviewed a Palestinian who currently lives in Canada. First, I wanted to know what a regular day was like in Gaza.
So a regular day in Gaza is, I would say, very similar to a regular day in Egypt or Lebanon. People wake up, either go to work or just because most of the population in Gaza are unemployed. So you have a lot of people either going to coffee shops. They're very popular in Gaza. When I was there, most of the time we spent was either at a coffee shop or a restaurant. So there's not much for people to do. So that's a regular day in Gaza, but there's always this politics talk. A lot of the people love to discuss politics. They're also a little paranoid of when is the next attack going to happen? When is Israel going to hit again? What's going to happen tonight? That kind of question is always on people's minds.
Of course, politics has to be a huge topic for discussion, especially because of the situation that Gaza's in. However, this caused me to wonder, how can Palestinians relax and enjoy life when they're in such a dangerous situation?
that's another side of Gaza that a lot of people don't see. Like, people in Gaza love to celebrate. You'll have when I went, there was a wedding every day, even during the attacks last month. My friend was telling me there was a wedding happening right as another town was being hit. So people want to celebrate. They're the type of people that got used to being bombarded, that they no longer fear as much as they did, for example, 4 years ago during the Gaza Strip. So it's very normal right now. Even with the attacks, I wasn't in Gaza during the attack that happened, Pillar of Cloud. But I was in contact with a lot of friends, and honestly, they're just happy people. Like, they will crack a joke as you're talking to them, and you could hear like bombs happening in the background. So they've gotten used to it.
The tolerance of the Palestinian people amazes me. I can't imagine being tolerant of bombs being dropped day after day. As she explains, most people have gotten used to it.
We don't feel the same way they do, just because they've gotten used to the way of living. So they take it a lot more easily than we do. If I hear that like a bombing took place in Gaza City today, I get a little scared, but people over there are just like, yeah, this is just a regular thing. It happens every once in a while. So they're not as paranoid or as scared as we are.
When lives being lost becomes the norm, it's time for a change. I asked her if she sees any change coming in the near future now that Palestine has been recognized as a state by the UN.
As Palestinians, we don't see any sort of change. But other than actually things going to the worst. So after the UN recognized Palestine, you have Israel going on with its settlement plans. And then you have clashes taking place in Hebron, in Bethlehem, in Jerusalem, in Ramallah. So it hasn't changed much for the regular Palestinians, but maybe as an international perspective, yes, Palestine is not recognized as a state. So if someone says Palestine doesn't exist, well, the UN recognized it. So that's one way to look at it. But really, if you go to Palestine right now, it will just seem the same as it was 4 or 5 months ago. Maybe there will be change in the near future or in the far future, but to be honest, I've been reading a lot, and it just seems impossible for anything to happen, for like a peaceful solution to happen, as long as Israel goes on with its settlements. I honestly don't see much of a change happening after the recognition of Palestine in the UN. Just because as long as the US, China, Russia, and so on support Israel, not much change will happen. Regardless of the 138 states that supported the recognition of Palestine, they have no power compared to the US and those countries.
While peace seems nearly impossible in the near future, I asked her, what needs to happen in order for there to be change in Palestine?
So what is needed mostly is international pressure, especially from the first world countries. For example, Canada, the US, Britain, China, and those like so on. So once we have those countries putting pressure on Israel, Israel will then do something about it. For the settlement plans, we've seen like condemnations happen from the US, from Britain, but not much has been happening. What needs to happen right now is for the US to stop funding Israel. Once the US stops funding Israel, Israel will then feel a lot more pressured to stop. So you can't tell a person, okay, stop killing people, but here's some more money. You could make your warheads a lot more stronger.
She brought up a great point. Can the United States both fund and condemn Israel at the same time? So, I asked the only question that naturally follows.
Why should the U.S. Support Palestine rather than support Israel?
It's very clear. If you look at it, back in 1945, when the Second World ended, you have the oppressed people, who were the Jews, being slaughtered and killed um, by the Nazis. And they were the minority or the oppressed, just like the Palestinians are right now. But they gained world support.
Mm-hmm.
They were given a state. The US supported them. So if you compare that to the Palestinians today, if you go to Palestine and just live a day, go through checkpoints. To be honest, checkpoints on their own are very humiliating. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. As a Canadian citizen, at some point at night, we were passing through one town to the other in the West Bank. I was asked to completely strip naked in front of, and thank God it was only like them and just our car, so it wasn't bright in the day but it was still very humiliating for a Canadian citizen to go through this. So imagine what a Palestinian without anything goes through. That's one thing. The other thing is that it's very clear if you look at the statistics, Palestinians have been slaughtered and killed ever since 1948, ever since Israel was recognized, or as it existed. So if you look at how many Palestinians died ever since then, you will see the oppression that the Palestinians go through.
And she didn't stop there. She kept on piling more and more reasons.
When our water is controlled by Israel, how much water we get a day? The Gaza Strip on its own, it's been under blockade for 6 years right now. Even after the ceasefire, it's still under blockade. Not much has happened, and not much has changed. When I went to Gaza and tried to go through, it took forever for me to go through. I think I had to stay at the borders for 13 hours until I was allowed to go in. So that on its own is also another issue. Electricity, because of the blockade, there is not much electricity. We get in Gaza, you get 6 hours or 5 hours of electricity for the entire 24 hours. So, and then you have the treatment of Palestinian prisoners within Israeli prisons. You have, I think, 1,500 cases of illnesses of Palestinian prisoners just because of the lack of the Israeli government treatment to those prisoners.
Okay, I was convinced. Palestinians are being mistreated in Gaza and in the Western Bank. Now, the real question is, how can someone who is living overseas get involved? How can we make a difference?
So, last question: What can people do to help?
As a student who's part of Students Against Israeli Apartheid, I honestly suggest people boycott, and it's very, very helpful. We as students, I try to raise awareness on what's happening. That's one thing that we could do, is raise awareness within our country. When you have a country that supports, or the government that supports Israel, for example, as a Canadian, and my government fully supports Israel. When I'm slowly educating people on campuses, telling them why we should elect this party and not this party, because this party supports the state of Israel, and a lot of the profits go to Israel, and they fund Israel, and so on. So you need to educate the people around you. So I try to educate my campus, for example.
She continued to elaborate on how educating people is important to making an impact on the conflict. She also made it clear that voting and peaceful assembly are things that you can do to raise awareness. In Palestine, the conflict is rough and change is hard to come by. But hopefully, that won't stop us from trying.
As a Palestinian who wants to return and wants to go back to living in Tel Aviv, that's nearly impossible.
Reporting for PCNN, I'm William Queen.